This is Fantology.
You may have heard of us.
So what do you get if you take a rock band and cross it with a fantasy book? Maybe not a combination that you have personally thought about, but the answer to this rhetorical question is, of course, The Kings of the Wyld by Nicholas Eames. It's a fantastic book with it's a nice fresh breath of air in the fantasy book landscape. It came out a few years ago in 2017, but I'm just kind of getting around to reading it. I've heard about it several times, all good things, and I have more good things to report back in this review. No spoilers here, so if you haven't read yet, feel free to watch and kind of get hyped up, and I really encourage you to read because I think any viewer of this video on Fantology would enjoy this one. We read it on our Discord. We have a Fantology Discord, and we read it together as a book club together. We did some comments back and forth. It was a fun time, so if you want to join us there and pitch future books to do book club for and just kind of chat with some fellow nerds of the community, that's a good time. But before I promote myself too much at Fantology, The Kings of the Wyld. So Nicholas Eames actually has a playlist on his website that you can go through and read each chapter and listen to the song that accompanies the chapter. I actually didn't find out about that till a bit too late, so I didn't get to experience that, but I would encourage that because this very much reads like different tracks of a rock album. As funny as that sounds, like it's totally true. So pros of reading the book. Why should you read? It's going to feel very familiar, but in a refreshing way. So we're dropped into a hero type story that we've seen before. Without doing any spoilers, the main character is part of one of these bands, and he was famous years ago. He's kind of an older, washed up guy now, gets pulled back into a conflict, joins back up with his bandmates, and goes off on a merry adventure. So, we've heard this kind of group up and go off and fight evil type of story before. Nothing new there. However, the execution is quite fun. It's going to feel familiar in terms of if you like Dungeons and Dragons, for example, the party is made up of your typical your dungeon party, right? With a lot of fresh takes. The characters are very well realized and have a lot of things that make them kind of fun individually, more than just this guy's the wizard, this guy's the fighter. There's a lot of real unique, kind of subtle ways that Eames makes you really care about the characters and care about what they're doing. The world itself is not too original. I wouldn't say it's derivative either, but it's got enough unique elements to make it interesting, at the same time feel very familiar. It feels like it's a bigger place than we see. And this is only the first book of a series. We have a sequel already out and a third book expected, I believe, relatively soon. Although I'm not sure 100% about that, so maybe follow up on Reddit or something for an update there. But the setting itself, is good. It's not great. It's not terrible. It's enough to kind of get things going and leave you wanting more. However, where this book shines is in, I already mentioned the characters, but also in the pacing and the action and just the experience of reading the book. It's very fast paced. Things are always happening. It's always a good time. And the writing itself is quite funny and witty. It just makes it kind of a joy to read. The chapters are fast paced, very snappy. You go from thing to thing as we're moving towards the big thing. So it's just kind of fun to read, and it's a real binge-worthy type of book where it's tough to put down, and that's a fun experience. To this day, having read a lot of fantasy books, sometimes it's hard to find the same experience that I got when I was a kid and I would just binge through books. And this one I feel has that, even if you're an experienced fantasy reader. Nicholas Eames, at the back of my copy, had an interview where he talked about some of his inspirations, and a lot of them are contemporary authors, popular authors, like your Joe Abercrombie type author. And I think as you read, if you're familiar with Abercrombie or familiar with authors like John Gwynne, you're going to see a lot of similarities. Fast-paced, good action, good characters, really just kind of draws you in and doesn't let you go. But he's got his own twist to it. It's not as dark as an Abercrombie. I know that kind of turns people off. Some people are turned off by the grimdark side of things. There is darkness here. There is some swearing for sure. However, there's not nearly as much like real visceral violence. There's obviously violence and fighting and killing and all those things that we kind of come to expect in a story like this. But it's a little tamer. It's not nearly as heavy with the description, and it's more fun throughout. Like, I'm not as concerned reading this that my characters are about to go the way of Game of Thrones type of thing. It doesn't have that feel to it. There's certainly some darkness to the story and trials and characters and evil characters we're trying to overcome. However, there's always kind of this sense of hope. Like, you feel like this is a fun adventure and we're going to prevail. And that really just kind of makes it, I think, more accessible to more readers. Okay, so ratings for individual portions of the book. Plot, I'm giving 7 out of 10. I think the plot itself is nothing super special. Like I said, it's a fairly basic, I don't want to say derivative, but it's a type of story that you've seen before. There's some good twists, and the way that he sets them up are, they pay off very well. He'll set something up, and then it'll be important later on. It's very well done. Doesn't feel too formulaic. The characters still have room there to explore and make you feel like it's a character-driven book. So that's all very well done. However, there's nothing like super unique that makes me want to bump it up to like an 8 or 9 where it's really mind-blowing and a plot that I'm going to remember. I'm mostly going to remember this for just the fun it was to read. The ending was maybe a little flat. Looking back, I think it doesn't seem like it really could have ended any other way. I think it's the correct way to end things. However, maybe just the way that the story is framed kind of puts the story into a corner where it's like, yeah, of course it had to end that way, and it's fine, but at the same time, maybe it's not like quite as exciting as we want in a big epic fantasy. Okay, characters, like I said, really enjoyed. 8 out of 10. There weren't any characters that are real standout, like I'm going to put in my, bracket of top characters ever type of thing, but there are at least like a couple that have real unique voices that are just a joy to read throughout. Some, maybe not quite as interesting, so they vary. I think everyone's going to kind of have some different favorites. But 8 out of 10 is, a solid, like, B level of characters here. The setting I enjoyed. Like I said, it's nothing too unique. Kind of maybe similar thoughts to characters. I'm going to actually give it a 7 out of 10. The things that I liked about it were the way that it blended magic and technology. It's a nice, soft magic system that is very appropriate for the tone of the book. There's no room here for a hard magic system. I like hard magic systems. I like a lot of books that have them, but this is, very appropriate. I think that one thing about the book is Nicholas Eames did a very good job of crafting the correct things around the story that he wanted to write. He didn't try to be too much like any other author, and he made a lot of good choices here. And for a first published work by Nicholas, I think this is really great, and I'm excited to read the sequel. Pacing, again, perfect fit for the themes of the story. I'm giving it 9 out of 10, one of the stronger ratings, because like I said, it's real binge-worthy, and it just fits perfectly. The shorter chapters really make it more digestible, so each one's only a few pages, and it feels like the plot is always moving around really fast, which is great for the story we're trying to get here. Prose, I'm giving 8 out of 10. For me, it was a breath of fresh air after reading Memories of Ice, the third Malazan book. Here, no need for a dictionary or thesaurus, right? You can just kind of read through. It's very accessible style of writing, which personally I actually prefer. I think, both styles are great. They're very different types of stories, like I said. So here in Kings, we're getting the prose that we need for the story. It's also very funny throughout, very kind of dry, sarcastic wit that I personally really like. Like, this is my humor this is my go-to thing here. So this was a real good appeal for me. If you have a different sense of humor, I could see maybe this book is not for you quite as much. I think it's still enjoyable, but I think appreciating these bits of dry humor really just add to the experience and make it just a pleasure to read the whole time. Okay, final rating here. The awesome/epic factor is a 10 out of 10. This is Brandon Sanderson's third law of writing, or whatever you want to call it, which is basically just always err on the side of being awesome. And there are a lot of really cool cinematic scenes that just fit right. Like, I could see a movie or TV series easily developed from Kings of the Wyld, which is, not every fantasy series goes for that. This one certainly did. Like, I feel like he was maybe trying to really paint a picture of events, and there are some really dramatic, creative ways that the action unfolds, and it really worked for me. really worked. The description was great and really just kind of dropped me right in there. So overall, it's getting an 8 out of 10. I think I actually average out almost exactly to 8. Don't do math on air as you're trying to do things. But I would recommend Kings of the Wyld to almost any fan of fantasy. I don't know if it would be my first recommendation, but having heard that people like things like Joe Abercrombie or John Gwynne, especially like faster paced, maybe like a Valen Alsorna, Anthony Ryan, if you're into that faster paced, yeah, maybe not necessarily military fantasy, but, fantasy where fighting and adventure is happening a lot, like this is a can't miss recommendation. I feel like most people are going to enjoy this one. Maybe The Black Tongue Thief, also kind of similar vibes there, although it doesn't try to be quite as funny. The Black Tongue Thief is like a comedy throughout. This one, there's maybe more of a story interwoven, but both great books, and I could not recommend both more highly. So it's an 8 out of 10, which is a solid recommendation for me. Go check it out. The series continues with the sequel, which I believe is called The Bloody Rose. It, without doing too many spoilers, it's following maybe some different plot events, and read the first book and figure out what the second one is for yourself. It's not quite as linear as you might expect from what I believe is at least a trilogy, if not more. I'm actually not 100% sure if Nicholas Eames himself has decided where the series is going. But definitely support a new author, a new voice in the community that's done some great work. All right, everyone, keep your swords sharp. Stay out of any place. If you're in a fantasy landscape and there's a big place in the middle of the map that's like ruled by dragons and beasts and all kinds of different creatures that you find in your monster manual, and it's called the Wyld with a Y, W-Y-L-D. Just stay out of those places. Like nothing good is going to happen to you there. So that's my sage advice that I've learned from Kings. See you later.